our friends from Department of Revenue kind of give us an update on all things they say grace over, and kind of rehash some of the things for the committee that we dealt with in the short off-season out of session with as it relates to ABC and construction, some construction-related issues. So right now I will ask Commissioner Graham and Meg, if y'all want to make your way over, recognize you to give us an update.
Can y'all hear me?
Yes.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for having us here. And my name is Chris Graham. I was appointed Commissioner of Revenue back in July while you all were still in session. And you all graciously confirmed me to the position. So I've been full-time since I think it was about July the 13th. And so we just finished out half of the fiscal year. As y'all are aware, the Department of Revenue does a whole lot of things in the state. Our primary function is collection of taxes. We collect about $8 billion a year, a little bit over $8 billion a year. I think we deposit about $40 million a day. And one of our jobs is to collect all the different taxes that the legislature authorizes to be assessed on our citizens and non-residents of the state as well, and to make sure those go to the right places. As you all may be aware, the current fiscal year we just made it halfway through the current fiscal year at the end of December. And so we're halfway through fiscal year 2021. I still have a hard time keeping the years straight, but we're halfway through fiscal year 2021. And I know this is not the Appropriations Committee, but so far this year, the financial well-being of the state appears to be good. Revenue collections have been up this year. Some of that is due to some tax shifts that happened late last year. If you'll recall, the Department of Revenue shifted some of the filing dates for our income taxes to July 15th. And so some of the good fortunes we've had this year would be a result of money really that gets allocated back to fiscal year 2020 for financial reporting purposes. And so while we've been strong with our revenue collections, some of it is due to the filing deadline shifts, and so I'm sure that y'all will be hearing about that as the appropriations process gets started. But I'm here to tell you that the economy has been in good shape so far this fiscal year, and we made it halfway through the fiscal year, and it looks really good. I think we're well over $300 million over what we estimated that we would be at. So the numbers look really good so far this year. I would say over the summer, but I don't think you all left here over the summer. I think y'all were in session all summer, so I guess it would be during the off season. There were a couple of committees that we participated on. One was the Alcoholic Beverage Control Study Committee, and we spent a fair amount of time hearing from people in the liquor distribution and selling businesses. I think we had 2 meetings where we discussed ABC issues, and heard a lot of good testimony from a lot of good people. It was actually 2 days of testimony the first time, and then an additional day back in November. So we spent basically 3 days talking about everything related to liquor distribution in the state of Mississippi, and I wanted to give you a real brief update of that today. And we also spent a day talking about the contractor's tax and the construction tax, and Meg Bartlett can give you all a quick rundown of the construction contractor's tax issues that we discussed. Just to kind of start back at ground zero, we've been in the liquor business since the 60s. When Prohibition ended in the 60s, the state got into the liquor business. In 1983, I think it was 1983, it was in the 80s, the state built a warehouse because in the state of Mississippi, whenever permittees need to order liquor, that liquor goes through the state liquor distribution warehouse. And since 1983, we've had the current warehouse that's up in Gluckstadt. We have a warehouse that's over 200,000 feet up in Gluckstadt that houses all of the liquor that comes to the state, goes through that warehouse. Well, most all of it goes through that warehouse first. And so the state is actually in the distribution business for liquor before it gets to our permittees. That warehouse was built in 1983. We had an addition to it along the way, but for the most part, it really has not had a substantial amount of renovation over that entire period of time. And so the warehouse, as you can imagine, is not in great shape. It needs some pretty major overhauls. to it. And so that's one of the things the committee looked at this summer was, what is the condition of the warehouse, what needs to be done to it. And based on some of the meetings and conversations that we had during the committee meeting, we actually went back and did a little homework and tried to put together some scenarios for you all to consider as we go forward. But just to give you a couple of facts about liquor distribution in Mississippi, we have the ABC Enforcement Division at the Department of Revenue. Those are the people who enforce the local option laws, all the beer laws. They issue permits to permittees. They do inspections of permittees. That's the enforcement side of things. We also have what we call the warehouse side of the liquor distribution in Mississippi. The warehouse is really what we looked at this summer. At the warehouse like I said, it's up in Madison. We have about 100 employees who work up there. We have 35 people who work on a day shift. We have 45 people who work on a night shift. And during the daytime, they receive shipments in from the suppliers. And at night, they actually process orders and get trucks loaded for deliveries the next day. So we have 35 people during the day who handle receiving and getting the inventory ready, stocked up so it can be loaded onto trucks at night. We have a 35-day shift, 45 night shift, and about 20 office workers. So we have a total of about 100 people who work at the liquor distribution center. The administrative people include some of the managers and some of the accounting staff that help us with all the different functions, the purchasing staff that helps with all the different functions of the liquor distribution center. Normally we ship, and I gave you a couple of handouts, normally we ship in a calendar year 3.5 million cases. This year we shipped about 4 million, just shy of 4 million cases. And the way liquor distribution works, we have about 1,600 restaurants, caterers, other types of permittees. We have about 600, maybe 700 liquor stores, package stores. So total, we have about 2,200 permittees. And the way our system works is they log into our computer system and place their orders. And before COVID, so this is back in February, March of this year, before COVID, when it came time to order product for your restaurant or your package store, you would go on our system and order one day, and within a day or two, you would actually receive a shipment of alcohol. So whatever you had ordered, you would receive that. When COVID hit, apparently everybody started buying toilet paper, fitness equipment, liquor, and they started renovating their homes, okay? So just overnight, our demand went out the roof. I mean, in March, our numbers just went way up, and that continued up and through December. Our numbers year over year, there were some months where our growth was 35% more than what we had the year before. And so we're operating on our same budget with our same number of people with a 35% increase in demand. And Mississippi, for a couple of months, actually led the nation in alcohol sales growth-wise during the pandemic. And so our sales were really, really strong after COVID hit. And to back up a little further, probably going back as far as 2014 of things that I have reviewed, the Department of Revenue has spent a lot of time thinking about what all needs to be done to the warehouse. And so they've had people come in and do utilization studies. They've done productivity studies. They've asked people for information. Hey, if we were to privatize or do something different, would you be interested in helping us run this? And so they've done all these different types of studies. And even in one of the studies that I read, it said by 2019, the warehouse was going to be just about at capacity of what it can ship every night. So there's only so much we can do with the space that we have in the current building that we're in with the type of equipment that we're using to do that work. And so one of the studies said by 2019, we're going to be right at capacity, okay? And that was about correct until COVID hit, which, our demand increased 35% in a warehouse that was already just about at capacity anyway. And so it really created a real problem for us in processing orders. Like I said earlier, normally when you made an order, within a day or two, you would actually receive that order. And so over the summer, it became a week before you received your order. And as time went on, it got up to about 2.5 weeks before you received your order. And so when I came in July, we continued doing some of the work they'd already started doing to try to curtail some of the demand issues. And keep in mind, it's just like toilet paper. Some of the demand issues are caused by erratic purchasing habits, and some of it is caused by people actually being at home more and needing more alcohol or whatever else it is that they're doing. And so you had kind of a mixture of we would like to call that kind of scared buying. And then also you have more people, restaurants were closed for a while. And I've heard several people say, $10 will buy you more at a package store than it will at a restaurant. And so the purchasing power, I think, increased because people were at home more. Another thing that happened is the federal government increased the unemployment benefits. And so some people, not a lot of people, but some people were making about as much, maybe even more than what they would make normally. And so some of those people, we think, probably had more disposable income than they would have had otherwise. And then also, a lot of us received a check from the federal government. And we think some of that money was probably used to buy toilet paper and exercise equipment, and people went to the home improvement stores, and they also went to the liquor store. And so you had all these factors from March until now that have contributed to an increase in demand on our liquor distribution center. And as a result, we got up to about 2 weeks. So if you were a retailer, maybe a package store or a restaurant, and you placed an order, it would take a couple of weeks for the Department of Revenue, for the ABC warehouse to get that order delivered to you. And that was a real change for a lot of the permittees because they were used to ordering one day and getting it within a couple of days. And what we saw in our system is that as a result of these changes, some of them changed their purchasing habits, and they also started, I hate to call it gaming the system, that may be too harsh of a word, but they were using the system to the best of their store's ability to help themselves and possibly help some others that they would know. And so we spent a lot of time working within our current system to try to stop some of the, what I would call games. I don't mean that in a derogatory way, but to make sure everybody had the ability to order and everybody had a fair shot at getting a delivery within a reasonable amount of time. One of the things we did is we started working extra days, in which, if I could describe what this is, literally our warehouse workers are, I think someone told me they may pick up 30,000 pounds in a night. I think that may be correct. And so one warehouse worker is throwing cases onto a conveyor system that helps get that package over to an area where it's staged to be loaded onto a truck. And when you add another day of work, some of this was in the summer, during the hot hours of the summer, we don't have climate control in our warehouse. So we had people working pretty hard over the summer, but we did add an extra day. The way our shifts work, the day shift works 10 hours, the night shift comes in and works 10 hours. They usually do that 4 days a week. When we added another day, that added a Friday to their work schedule, and so now they're working 10 hours a day, 5 days a week. But in reality, because we're already at capacity, we're really working them more than 10 hours a day. And so they would have gotten overtime even if we didn't add the extra day. But back in maybe August, we added an extra day per week to try to work on the backlog that had been created. And it's pretty hard work for those guys. And by Thanksgiving, we had gotten our order backlog back down to about a week. So when you ordered within about a week, you would get your order. Of course, then came the holidays, which is naturally a higher demand time for us. You also have some holidays that we actually gave our employees so that they could have some time off for Christmas and New Year's, and that drove our backlog back up, and we're probably at 2.5 weeks right now. So if you ordered, you would be a solid 2 weeks before you got your order. And having said that, we working with the study committee this summer, we started exploring, okay, what are our options? What do we want to do? And I've given you a handout. It has 2 pages. The page that has Liquor Distribution Center at the top. That'll kind of show you where we are at the end of June. So that shows you fiscal year 2020, fiscal year 2019, and fiscal year 2018. And if you'll look at the first 2 lines, the cases received this past fiscal year, were 3.7 million, and the cases that we shipped were 3.7 million. And if you'll compare the cases shipped in fiscal year 2020 to 2019, you can see as of June 30th, we were 400,000, roughly 400,000 over the year before. Now, I told you earlier we shipped almost 4 million over the calendar year. So from January to December, we shipped almost 4 million cases. It's 3.9 million. And you see that, so the demand that we're shipping out has just grown tremendously. The other thing I wanted to point out to you all is when we sell liquor to permittees, so that's package stores, restaurants, and other permittees that we have, we charge taxes on those. The primary taxes are listed on this sheet under general fund transfers. That would be your markup. So every time we sell a case, there's a 27.5% markup that goes onto that onto our price for that purchase. That 27.5%, 3% of it goes to the Department of Mental Health, to an alcohol abuse fund, and the remainder of it goes to the state general fund. So every time the state sells a case of liquor, there's a markup that's applied. There's also excise taxes that are applied, and that's on that sheet as well. And then there's also a sales tax, a wholesale sales tax that is applied to those sales. And you can see when people talk about the markup, that's going to be the 27.5%, which includes the amount that goes to the general fund, and then there's the 3% that goes to the Department of Mental Health. And so you can see last year, as a result of sales, the line that says general fund transfers markup, we transferred $73 million to the state general fund. And the year before it was $66 million. The 3% that goes down to the Department of Mental Health is down below that. It says Department of Mental Health transfer, $8.9 million in fiscal year 2020. That's their portion of the 27.5%. That's their 3% of the markup. And you see the year before was 8.1 million. The other sheet I gave you was the department's work following the study committee. So the study committee brought in, like I said earlier, all types of folks from industry to testify and discuss some of the things they had seen, some of the things that they suggested, and in the Department of Revenue, we spent a fair amount of time talking about what we do and how we handle operations. And this is kind of the department's summary of the primary options, I think, that you all ought to consider going forward on how to handle the liquor distribution center. There's probably 50 different ways you could do it, so I don't think this is an exhaustive list. You could even tweak this list any way you wanted to. So this is just a listing of some of the things that we saw and kind of what we think the costs related to those different options would be. I'd be happy to go through them. I'd be happy to entertain any questions as well, whatever the chairman would want.
Kind of hit the high points, I think, of what you've got listed here. Okay,
the 2020 Legislative Study Committee, that handout, the first option that we kind of saw and did some work on, it involves 3 sub-options that we've listed here. So the first one would be under the category that the Department of Revenue retains control of ABC operations and stays involved in the liquor distribution business in Mississippi. And like I said earlier, the warehouse has really not seen a substantial upgrade for years and years. And so the first one is modernize ABC operations. And we've run a cost and spent a fair amount of time talking to consultants and folks who are in the business to come up with some I think pretty decent estimates of what it would cost us as a state to modernize ABC operations and continue to ship. And we've divided it into 2 phases. The first phase that we're suggesting the legislature consider would cost $14 million. That's a one-time cost. And then after that, it would cost $2 million per year. And the one-time cost would be us getting a new warehouse management system. That's a computer system that helps us receive and process orders from when they come in the warehouse to when they go out of the warehouse. And actually, the newer warehouse management systems, you can actually track it to delivery at the permittees. That also involves us buying new racking. A lot of these cases sit on racking in our warehouse that's really old. Most of it's damaged. A lot of it's not salvageable. And so that $14 million would include purchasing new racking. There's a lot of equipment that's involved in processing and loading trucks. So that includes all the costs for the equipment that we would need. And then the recurring annual cost of $2 million, about $1 million of that would be for raises for the workers in the warehouse, the actual people who are lifting the 36,000 pounds a night, give them raises to bring their salaries up to what the surrounding areas are able to pay people who are similarly situated, and then to also implement what we call a productivity pay package for them so that they're paid based on productivity. A lot of times with our state employees, we penalize them when they don't do what they should do, and we don't reward them whenever they do work high productivity. So that would include some money for productivity pay. And then the rest of it is for an annual equipment replacement program so that we can replace our equipment on a regular basis so that we don't get into the situation we're in now where we have a bunch of outdated equipment that no longer functions. Phase two, this cost is a little fuzzier. I don't think the numbers here, I think we have some work to do on these numbers, but phase two would also involve expanding the size of our warehouse. So our current warehouse is about 200,000 square feet, and we think we need, is that right, Meg? It's 211,000, I think, is the amount. And we think we need to make an addition to the warehouse because we are at capacity. If you go out there, which unfortunately, I would suggest we not go out there right now with COVID. If you go out there, we have product all over the place. There's not much room to operate, and so we do believe that there's an expansion that's needed. We've worked with the Department of Finance and Administration to come up with a rough estimate on expanding the warehouse, and we think it would cost $150 to $200 per foot to expand it and build something similar to what we have now. I think that number could come down a little bit. But that's the estimate that they've given us so far to do an expansion. All right, so the second option that we have listed under the Department of Revenue retaining control is to outsource warehouse and distribution. This would be if you contracted with a company to come in and run the actual operations of the warehouse. And so the company that would be operating out of the state-owned warehouse would be a private company instead of having state employees. Based on some information we've received over the years, we think that cost would be about $3 to $5 per case. And I told you we shipped about 4 million cases last year. Okay, so at $3 a case, that'd be about $12 million a year. At $5 a case, that would be $20 million a year. So we think it would cost the state $12 to $20 million annually to do that. Our staff that actually works on the warehouse floor, they're just under $5 million a year to pay them, and so you would see a reduction in those costs. And so you would have a net, you'd be a net increase, but it would be reduced by what we currently pay the warehouse staff. The third option that we listed here was to remove wine from ABC control and then retain spirits. Again, we would have an initial cost to have a new warehouse management system. It's a little lower than the $14 million that I mentioned earlier. You'd still have a recurring annual cost of about $2 million, but you'd also have a reduction in annual staff. We could reduce the size of our staff a little bit. And then the revenue that's attributable to wine is about $32 million. We think you would have a hard time keeping the statutory markup if you allow private companies to deliver wine, and so that $32 million is reflective of what we think you would lose on the statutory markup. And then the second option that we mentioned on this page, at least, is to remove ABC operations from the Department of Revenue. Of course, you could create an alcoholic beverage control authority. The Lottery Commission, a representative from the Lottery Commission came and spoke to the committee about the Lottery Commission. And how they're set up. They're quasi-governmental. They're not subject to some of the rules that we're subject to for purchasing and paying employees. They have a little more flexibility probably than a state agency would. We believe that those involve the same costs as listed above in modernizing the ABC, and then we also think that you'll end up paying more probably for employee costs as a result of doing that. And so the numbers are are pretty close, I think, on the modernization part, but I think you would have an increase in the cost for running the warehouse. And then the last thing would be, that we listed at least, would be to abolish ABC and completely privatize all wine and spirits. In my opinion, your most possible cost that you're going to have is losing the statutory markup, which is going to be roughly $89 million a year once you factor in what the state receives in the general fund and the Department of Mental Health receives. If you completely privatize it and keep the statutory markup in place, I think it's possible, very likely, that you'll see an increase in the cost of alcohol, because any private company that's going to run it is going to try to run it at a profit. And so we think that could increase costs 20 to 30% possibly. And that's a very long, rambling explanation of the sheet. I'd be happy to take any questions.
All right. Question, Senator McDaniel. Do you mind coming to a microphone so people that are streaming can hear?
There you go. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that. First of all, let me say I've appreciated your department here of late. It's been very responsive, and I've had the chance to ask a few questions of your personnel, and they've been great. You're doing a good job over there. So please don't take my questions as hostile in any way, shape, or form. I guess I'm trying to understand the purpose of what we're doing over there. In fairness, we were not in the whiskey business or in the liquor business prior to the 1960s. And then for whatever reason, the state decided to enter the whiskey and liquor business. Outside of a revenue feature, is there another reason that we are in that business? I can't think of any. I'm trying to understand what it might be.
Yeah, and like I said earlier, I'm fairly new to the job, and obviously I'm still learning all the ins and outs. I think there are probably, we could probably write a book. As a matter of fact, I think I have a book sitting on my desk of the various reasons the state might be involved in the business. I mean, I think they're, first and foremost, it's a controlled product, and it does inebriate. I saw Senator Clark came in the room. We could have him do the Soggy Sweat speech. I don't remember it all, but so I think there is probably a public health concern and issue that the state policymakers, I think as a policy-making body, you all have to make a decision. Right. Is it enough of a public health concern? Do we want to be involved in it? And I would think that would probably be one of the primary reasons that the state is involved, is because of the public health implications.
Let me ask you about that then, because I could kind of sense that might be the case in the 60s. I'm sure there were a lot of people that were concerned about the great evil of alcohol and what it could do to the state of Mississippi. But if that logic prevails, then one would think that people would be unable to get alcohol, particularly if they were having problems. But I'm not aware of any shortage. In other words, it exists ostensibly for that reason, but I can't think of a single instance where someone was able to go buy their alcohol at some point. So again, outside of a revenue feature, I'm not sure what the purpose is. I understand what the claim is, but I'm still able to get it. Nobody's checking whether I have an alcohol issue when I walk into the liquor store. There doesn't seem to be a public health issue there.
Yes, sir.
So that's my first concern. Secondly, is the markup about 30% total?
Yes, sir. It's about 30%, I would say.
So it's fair to say that an end consumer is going to have to pay 30% more than they would otherwise in a free market. Is that fair?
I think that's a statement. I'm not sure. In a free market, they will pay a markup. I'm not sure what the markup would be, but they will pay a markup, and it would be based on what the market requires.
Right. And in the market, you've got competition, of course, and that drives down the price, because if someone prices themselves out of a market, then naturally
it certainly can. You would think the market would reflect a true price for it.
So the markup naturally wouldn't approach anywhere near 30%, because the competition alone would probably keep it much lower than that. But let's just assume it's 30% across the board. That cost is ultimately passed down to the consumer, is it not?
I think in order for package stores and retailer, other permittees to exist, that some of that cost would have to definitely be passed down to the end consumer.
And so following that logic, the end consumer is going to have 30% less income to spend on other items and services, assuming he's purchasing the alcohol. That's money he could have spent on other items or services in our economy, correct?
Yeah, assuming that the other delivery method would not also include the same markup. Yes, sir.
And if they're spending that money on other items or services, they're helping to drive the economy forward. And in fact, the state would receive revenue from those expenditures. Businesses theoretically would thrive in their community because of those expenditures. So I guess the point I'm making, if we abolish the organization at some point, this process, it's not as though we're turning away all of that additional revenue. It would just be created in other sectors of our economy. Would you agree with that?
I don't know if it would be dollar for dollar, but I do think that you would see some amount of economic impact on the other end of it. Yes, sir.
Absolutely. Okay. Do you have a strong opinion one way or the other as to whether we should demolish it and move to a private sector system?
No, sir, I do not.
Okay. All right. Thank you, sir. I may have others later, but thank you.
Thank you, Senator McDaniel. Senator Jordan.
Yes. First of all, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I remember correctly, probably some of you probably just been born, 1966, Governor Paul B. Johnson said he legalized liquor because he's tired of people staggering to the poll voting dry. So he decided he'd legalize it so that you could get some revenue out of it. The other thing, I'm looking at column under fiscal year 2020. I notice everything is increased. Does that mean that during turbulent time, people use more alcohol than normal conditions?
I think I might have misheard you. Did you say, does that indicate more people have used alcohol than in normal conditions?
Then in normal conditions.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And I see one mistake over here. I don't know where. You got too many zeros on one of your columns here. You can strike one off. That's typographical area, I assume.
We'll certainly fix that.
That's all I have.
Thank you, Senator Jordan.
Thank you, Senator Jordan. For the committee's sake, of the 17 or so control states, the markup varies state by state, but I'll give you some indication of what other states charge on a markup. Alabama's at 30%, Idaho's at 87%, Iowa's at 50%. Let's see, Missouri's at 65, Mississippi's at 27.5, Montana's at 40, North Carolina's at 39.5, Ohio's at 42.9. Be glad you don't consume in Oregon. It's at 113%. Pennsylvania's at 30. Utah is at 86%. Vermont's at 65. Virginia at 64. And West Virginia's at 28. So that gives you kind of an idea of what some of the other states have in their markup. And there's a mixture. Not all the states are the same. As far as those are the control states, obviously each state has their own excise tax, spirits tax, wine tax. Some states have a 46 or 57% tax on wine and spirits on instead of a markup. So, I mean, it goes across the board, varying state from state. But I saw a report earlier to the commissioner's point. During COVID, we were number one in uptick of sales for spirits and wine in the nation. So, if you're looking for something to hang your hat on, there you go. Are there any other questions for Senator Chasnow?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was looking at the estimated cost per square foot to construct a new warehouse. How many square feet do you anticipate that a new warehouse would actually have?
If the state decided to construct a brand-new warehouse for the liquor distribution center, we would need between 311,000 and 350,000 feet, and that would take care of us, I think, for probably approaching 20 years.
I'm always interested in the warehouse because I've toured it a couple of times with amazement. If wine were to be removed from the control of ABC, would that then mean that you wouldn't need a new warehouse? Because wine is very bulky to
It would-
store and sometimes volatile because it can turn into expensive vinegar in a hurry. Whereas Jack Daniel's, I think, is probably more stable.
That's correct. Yeah, we would not need an addition to the warehouse or a new warehouse if we remove wine from the ABC operations.
So that would be one cost savings, correct?
That's correct.
All right, thank you.
Senator Sojourner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Real quick, so there's 33, I guess, states that currently are not control states. I think that's right. There's a couple there's 4, so I guess that are kind of like us outside of the stores. Of those 17, do we know, are some of those states that were once fully controlled who have now fully privatized? And if so, do we have numbers or do we know what those states look like?
Washington is the most recent state that privatized, and they did not change their markup, and the largest liquor stores are on the border states with Washington. And I think there's an effort, if I'm not mistaken, I've heard anecdotally that there's an effort to try to go back to control state because it's been a disaster in Washington.
I live in one of those border towns. We can buy liquor on either side, and Louisiana and Mississippi handles it differently. So it would be interesting to look at the cost of liquor in Louisiana, it's a little higher than in Mississippi. I know the mandated markup, the legislative mandate that occurs. In some of the states that have privatized, have they shifted some of that markup to additional taxing to make up some of that difference?
I believe they do. They can either do it on the excise tax or they'll do a spirit tax or a wine tax. For instance, some states, in the control states, on the chart I'm looking at here, like Pennsylvania has a 30% markup, but they have an 18% markup on spirit tax. They don't have I don't think they have a wine. Wyoming has a markup, and they also have a spirit tax and a wine tax. Some of these states have a bailment fee. So if you're basically holding all their product inventory for them, they charge a bailment fee of anywhere from 70, 80 cents a case to $1.35, $2.50 per case in Ohio, and that's for the cases of inventory they have on hand. So you can shift it. I mean, you can move one column and adjust it in another 2 columns to make up for the quote markup. If you just do away with the markup and go to a private sector and then say, okay, we're going to raise the excise tax on wine and spirits.
Or we could put it back in the pockets of citizens and let them return those dollars in buying tennis shoes and other things and collect sales tax in that way. I have no further questions.
Senator?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As far as the operation of the warehouse, and I appreciate the numbers, and I know there's great debate over how much tax we should be charging, et cetera, but in the operation of the warehouse, what is causing the delay of shipment? Is it the inability to pick the order? Is it a lack of manpower? What exactly do you attribute the inability to deliver goods to the end user, in this case the package store, the restaurant, with a 2.5-week lag?
It's a combination of things. The primary restrictor is the condition of the warehouse itself, including all of the conveyors and forklifts and even the floor sweepers that are supposed to clean the floors and keep the floors clean. It's all outdated. That is going to be the primary problem with the system. The warehouse management system, it operates, but it does not operate, it is not ideal. And so the actual software package we use is not ideal. The building itself has some limitations. The exterior configuration of the building, we don't have quite enough loading docks, and so you do get a little bit of a bottleneck because of the limitation on loading docks. We do struggle a little bit with employees because of pay, and so compensation, I think, is for the warehouse workers themselves, the people who are doing the work, compensation is a challenge for us out there. And then the demand increase, where we've seen just a tremendous, we went from 3.5, 3.6 in the calendar year last year to 4 million this year with the same workers, the same old equipment, and they're doing a great job. It's more than they can bring down. So it's a mixture of those things, but I would put at the top of that list the condition of the warehouse equipment and facilities themselves.
And as far as the pay, you mentioned they went from 4 10-hour shifts to 5 10-hour shifts. I'm assuming they're receiving overtime. They're not true salary.
They do receive overtime, and they were already working overtime because we can't quite get it done in 2 10-hour shifts, and so they were already working overtime a little, but we've increased that a pretty good amount. It's not unusual for them to work some overtime during the holidays because demand usually increases anyway, but working overtime from, I believe it was August when we started until now, with kind of really right at this point, we're working on getting the number back down where we can stop that eventually, but at this point, that's going to continue on, and normally we would have stopped working overtime by now. But yes, sir, they do get paid overtime.
Okay, and at any point, I guess, 2 last quick questions. One is, we pull split cases still. Is that part of the problem with picking orders, is we allow split cases?
I do not. I have looked at that fairly closely, and I've asked a lot of questions about it because I'm new. I do not think that is the major, I wouldn't even put that on the list of things, and I didn't a second ago. I would not even put that on the list of things that cause us challenges out there.
And then the last, would there be any reason we're delayed is because of the actual shipper, or is it all on us?
The shipper has been very good to work with us on adding days, making their schedule as flexible as possible. And so the list I gave you, I did not include the shipper, and there's a reason I did not include the shipper. They're doing an adequate job, and they've done a good job working with us.
Thank you, Mr. Graham. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner Graham, are you at liberty to opine as to which one of these alternatives in the 2020 legislative study would have the most long-term benefits for Mississippi?
Well, I guess it depends on what you want to measure your benefits by. It's my belief, and we're not picking a team in this list. We think, as policymakers, you all have a tough decision to make. You'll have to make your decision. If your measurement is the most bang for your buck, based on what we have seen, if you give the Department of Revenue adequate funds to run the warehouse the way it needs to be run, we can do it, and we can do a good job, and we will do a good job. And we're going to, whatever you all decide, we're going to do our best to do a good job. But no, we're not picking one over the others that are on this list. Of course, this is not the entire list. You could come up with other alternatives as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Parker.
Just one more quick question, and this is kind of a reverse direction on the cost. You know, seeing that you're estimating a phase-in cost of $14 million, and, you know, as we look at this, I know this year, I know everybody in this body is looking to not find another $14 or $15 million cost. Just putting some math to it on my end, and listening to what the chairman said about neighboring states, the state that has the lowest rate other than us that I heard was 28% by West Virginia of the 17 central states, and we're at 27.5%. Just my math on that, you know, just kind of backing into it, is if we were at 28%, that would call, instead of 27.5%, that would increase the amount in, by my numbers, by about, if we did 1%, I'm sorry, it would be about 26 million. If we did half of that, it'd be about 13 million. You know, so have you looked at, you know, what number with that? Because just by my math, it looks like if we were 28% instead of 27, and I'm not advocating raising taxes here, but I'm just looking at, you know, in a worst-case scenario, what percent it would take to meet those needs without us having to dip into other funds for that.
Yes,
Have you
sir.
looked at that?
We
One
have-
quick
no, I'm sorry.
caveat. West Virginia that you mentioned also has a 80-cent per case bailment fee that they charge on every case that they hold. So there's also additional revenue on top of the markup for that.
So we're the lowest, according to,
We're
you know,
not the lowest. I mean, they're
of the
West Virginia-
17.
Yeah, 17% in Wyoming. West Virginia's 28%. And West Virginia also charges that 80-cent per case bailment fee. And if you look at the number of cases that we have on a yearly basis, 3,742,000.
So I guess, you know, to the chairman's point, you could back into that with a bailment fee change or with a percentage change if you were looking to do that. You know, even if it was for 1 year or if it was for, you know, a continued type of thing, that would be discussion. But do you have, you know, firm numbers on that, or is that something you could?
I don't have them with me, but we've looked at all of those scenarios, but I don't have those numbers with me. And when the liquor distribution center was built, there was actually a fee of some sort added on until the loan that was taken out was paid off. So there is some history of doing that, at least back in the 80s, where there was a fee added on, and I don't have that information with me there. I apologize. I can get it for you if you'd like.
Yeah, because I wouldn't want to see the government as a whole, you know, take on the responsibility for building a new warehouse for alcohol. You know, if we are to do something like that, you know, and again, owing to the fact that you have a lot of different options on here, you know, I think that responsibility would be most better shared or go to the consumers, you know, because their demand for it is what's driving the state's need to expand facilities.
Yes, sir.
All right. Any, Brother Senator Blunt?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know Senator Harkins knows this as a business he's in, but one thing that occurs to me is, and first I want to say that I know you and your predecessors have come over here for years and let this legislature know about this problem, that you're doing the job that the law gives you to do, and we have hamstrung your ability to do it effectively because we haven't invested in the business that we've given ourselves to do, which is we've decided the state was going to be in this business, and we haven't given you and your predecessors the money to run it effectively like it ought to be run. So and I'm glad you're back here asking. I'm glad Senator Harkins has set up this task force so we can finally do what we know has been a long-standing problem. But my observation is that you're right now in Gluckstadt, which is about one of the hottest commercial markets in the metro area for real estate. And there are other facilities, and you just got trucks coming in and trucks coming out. You don't need to be accessible. You're not accessible to the general public. You don't you've just got your distributors and that's it. Are there other facilities, and I've been searching on some of these LoopNet and other sites just now, you could buy a $300,000 square foot warehouse right off an interstate highway for $6 million in a place that is not maybe the most desirable if you were going to start a commercial business in the metro area, but for the purposes of a secure warehouse that serves a limited number of folks, might be a cheaper alternative than building new in a very desirable location. Have y'all looked at options to purchase an existing warehouse that can serve your needs for the next 20 or 30 years, if indeed we choose for the state to continue in this business?
We have looked around for other facilities, and I think I know of one that you may be referring to. I have not gone and personally viewed it, nor have we had our people go look at it, but we do have some information on some of those options. There aren't many in the state in
Of the size that you would need, assuming that we continue to keep you in the wine and the liquor
yes, sir.
business.
There aren't many, but yes, sir. We're open to all suggestions.
It just seems to me that if you can sell where the market's going up and you can buy where the market's affordable and it suits your needs, given the business that you're in, it might be an option that makes sense. So anyway, I just bring that up, and I appreciate Senator Harkins setting this up, because this is an issue that we've needed to deal with for a long time. Thank you.
Any other questions? Senator England.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner Graham, I appreciate everything you've talked about here today. I have a question about these options. I'm looking at them, and I can see the potential that at least two of these have to help with revenue. The first one, by modernizing the operations, our facilities can handle more and can then turn out more product. And then the third one, I understand that we could, there's a lot of economic development potential there. And other things we've looked at last year and going forward with removing wine from ABC control. But I want to talk about, we've got three options on the table here that we're looking at. That option B, the outsourcing warehouse and distribution, looking at the cost and the potential return, is there anything I'm missing other than the $4.8 million that second option would actually be a return to us that would save money? I mean, we've got the $4.8 million reduction in staff annual savings, but if we were to see an increase like we did this year with Mississippians purchasing alcohol, under that second option, it actually might even cost us more going forward. I'm just not sure if I'm missing something.
I would tend to agree with your observation, and that one would cost more than what we're currently spending, and that's assuming our $3 to $5 per case estimate is accurate, and we feel pretty decent about those numbers, although we're continuing to research outsourcing options and trying to come up with the best number we could give you all on that. But I think your observation is correct based on what we have so far.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any other questions from the committee on ABC? All right. Thank you for giving us that recap. And if you'd like to touch on the construction, some of the construction issues we talked about this off-season.
If the chairman would be inclined, I'd see if our Associate Commissioner Meg Bartlett would be willing to rescue me.
Come on down, Meg.
Good morning. We talked a little bit in our one-day session that we had about contractors tax and how Mississippi more broadly taxes all construction-related activities. And just as a brief overview, we tax construction activities in basically two buckets. Commercial construction, that's over $10,000, is taxed in one way. And then residential construction and any commercial construction that is less than $10,000 is taxed in another method. For commercial construction that's in excess of $10,000, we tax that at a rate of 3.5% on the total receipts of the job. That is a tax actually on the contractor. It's on the prime contractor that is doing the work, and so when their job exceeds $10,000 for any commercial construction activities on real property, that tax is at 3.5%. The contractor applies with the department for what we call a material purchase certificate. That MPC allows them to purchase component building materials and services exempt from the regular 7% retail sales tax. And then they just pay the 3.5% on the total receipts of the job, which includes materials, labor, and any overhead that the contractor has in that job. Contractors that normally perform services that are taxable at 7%, such as plumbers, electricians, and heating and air, contractors, when they perform those types of jobs for commercial customers over $10,000, they're also subject to the 3.5% contractor's tax. Commercial jobs less than $10,000 and all residential construction is treated the same for sales tax. If you have a taxable service, what I mentioned before, plumbers, electricians, heating and air conditioning, and insulating contractors primarily are the ones that are taxed at 7% on their total gross income from the job. So they are also taxed on their materials and labor. All other construction activities are taxed at 7% on materials. And then there are some of those activities that are what we call installed sales, where I'm selling and installing tangible personal property to real property. And then those jobs, if they're performed by one contractor, are taxed at 7% on labor and materials also.
Thank you. To give the committee kind of a real-world application of it, if you hired someone to build a house for you, you would not pay 7% on the total cost of the house. If somebody built you a house for $200,000, you would not pay $200,000 plus 7% sales tax. The contractor would pay 7% sales tax on all the materials they purchase throughout construction. If you hired somebody to build you a $200,000 office building, the contractor would get an MPC certificate, and they would hand that out to all their subcontractors and any materials they purchased, and they would not pay sales tax on the cost of the material or the service. But at the end of the job, they would pay 3.5%, or they would actually prepay in this instance, but you would pay 3.5% on the cost of the total job. So if it was $200,000, it'd be 3.5% of $200,000 that you would remit to the state. So that's kind of a 30,000-foot view of MPC versus sales tax in the application of residential versus commercial. One of the other problems or issues we discussed in this hearing was out-of-state contractors coming in some of these construction. When you have a disaster, when we had the hailstorm or hurricane, tornadoes, contractors come in from all over the state, and they don't register with Department of Revenue. They don't remit sales tax on jobs like our local contractors do, and that's become a problem. So our local contractors are working at a disadvantage, comparatively speaking, to outside contractors, because what they'll do is they go quote a job, they just won't charge sales tax because they're not gonna remit it. Whereas our local contractors are having to do it, they get audited and so forth. It puts our local folks at a disadvantage, a competitive disadvantage to these folks that come in out of town, and they usually come in for a short period of 3 to 6 months, and then they're out. So one of the ideas that we talked about was having some way to help Department of Revenue to level the playing field, making sure these people are registered with the Department of Revenue. I know that when I did business in Louisiana, you had to register with the Department of Revenue in order to pull a permit. Well, in order to register with the Department of Revenue in Louisiana, you had to register with the Secretary of State's office. So they help to make sure that they know who you are, you're operating in the state, and it gives them some teeth to go and make sure that they're doing the same thing that our contractors are having to do. So it somewhat tries to level the playing field in the contracting world, and I know it's been a problem in the past. So that's some of the things that we discussed. Meg, was there anything else that?
No, just in general, that's just kind of the landscape of taxing construction-related activities and the challenges thereof.
All right. Thank you. Are there any questions? Senator McMahon.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. First, I want to begin by thanking the Commissioner and the Associate Commissioner for being so responsive each and every time I've ever reached out to them. You respond very quickly to the people's needs. Each time I've had a constituent contact your offices or you've contacted, I just appreciate the professionalism and the timeliness of the responses. Thank you, Commissioner and Associate Commissioner.
Thank you.
A couple of things. I wanted to thank the chairman for tackling this and for holding hearings on it this summer and in the fall. This is really important. First of all, I'm concerned about the residents of Mississippi. Unfortunately, in the district I represent, we've had 3 tornadoes in the last 5 years, and I'm extremely concerned, and I've shared my concerns with this committee and the chairman about out-of-state companies that come into the area. They do roofing repair, they do all types of different repairs to homes that have been damaged, and they're not paying taxation. They're not paying their taxes, and they're putting our local companies at a disadvantage. And the residents many times suffer because they think they're having a roof repaired, and then a year later they find out it starts leaking and components have been left off of the total job. So they go back to their insurance company and say, hey, my roof's leaking again. And the insurance company say, well, your roof was improperly installed, you're missing components, so we won't cover it. So they're out of pocket a second time. So that's why this is important to me, is to protect the residents of this state, to be sure that they're empowered, that they know who they're doing business with, and that we're levying taxes on these out-of-state companies and protecting our own companies that are playing by the rules. That leads me into another topic. Our businesses here in Mississippi, almost every business I've ever dealt with, as far as contractors and construction, and I mean every business, most people are playing by the rules and doing exactly what they need to do. And I know we've discussed this before, Associate Commissioner, is, you know, many times you take a contractor or a subcontractor, they think they're playing by the rules and they're paying their fair share of taxes, and then you have found, and the commissioner has found, you know, they've been audited and they may owe $100,000 in back taxes by no fault of their own. Would you agree?
It does happen, yes.
Yes, and the department has been gracious in working with people on a payment plan or forgiving the debt in some way, you know, or forgiving the interest, not the penalties, but the interest. Not the tax, but the interest. But this is really important that we create a fair and balanced taxation program for our commercial contractors and the residential contractors, because the vast majority of Mississippians want to be good citizens of this state and pay their fair share of taxes as long as they're balanced. So this is really important to me, that we continue to work together to find a way to support these contractors, because when, you know, I'll tell you, my father was a cabinet maker and worked in the construction business for years, and I have family members that still do. And you know, when someone's audited by the government, the average citizen is petrified in fear. They're petrified because the weight of government, you know, you have all the staff, you have all the attorneys, and then they try to protect themselves. So I do appreciate the chairman taking up these important issues. I appreciate him being sympathetic. I appreciate the committee hearing my concerns this morning, and I do want to thank you, Commissioner and Associate Commissioner. Do you have anything to add to my comments?
I would say that I would agree with your comments. The majority of people we find are trying to do what they believe is the right thing, and it's a lack of information or knowledge about the taxation of their industry that leads to the mistakes that are made. And in those times when we find that, we do try to work with our taxpayers to abate penalties and or interest and or penalties if possible, and work with them on a repayment schedule that will fit the business, because we're not in the business of trying to put people out of business. But yes, sir.
And many times, Commissioner Bartlett, these businesses have accountants, and the accountants thought they filed the taxes correctly on behalf of the business owner. It's not like they were doing their own taxes and made a mistake. Wouldn't you agree?
That does happen, yes.
Yeah. So thank you for your work. Chairman, again, I cannot say enough how much I appreciate you tackling these big issues for the people of Mississippi. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator. Are there any other questions? Senator Simmons.
I'd like to echo Senator McMahon's gratitude to the chairman for his leadership in looking at this issue. And thank you, Mr. Chairman, for recognizing me for a question. Madam Associate Director, could you just state again, because I am concerned about our local contractors, and in your presentation I heard you say something about those individuals who are performing a taxable service like plumbers and electricians. Could you just explain that one more time for me about they pay 7% when they purchase the materials, and then they They actually pay?
No, sir, no, sir. For a business that's a taxable service, and just in general in Mississippi, our taxing scheme in general taxes all sales of tangible personal property unless there is an exemption specifically given.
Yes.
And then in the converse of that is that services are generally not subject to sales tax in Mississippi unless they are specifically listed in the law. And there are some construction type related businesses that are specifically listed in the sales tax law as being taxable on their total income. So that would include labor and materials. And that would be people like plumbers, heating and air conditioning services, electrician services, and installation services. Those are tied to construction activities. They have a sales tax number, so when they buy their materials, they don't pay tax when they buy them. But when they charge, when they have a job and they charge their customer, $200 for material and labor, they're going to charge tax on that $200.
I get it. Thank you.
So in other words, it's not being double taxed.
It is not being double taxed. That's correct.
Same piece of pipe a plumber buys is not being taxed twice.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Great. All right. Are there any other questions for the commissioners? Anybody? Going once, going twice? Hang on one second before you do that. I want to thank Commissioner Graham and Meg for all your work over the summer. It was kind of a difficult session for us to be dealing with, and then trying to have a hearing on this right after that was over with. I do appreciate your time and y'all's diligence in looking into all this, and I know it's not really over, so we're still kind of digging into this and working through this. So I just appreciate y'all's time and your effort that y'all put into this and getting us the information that we need. Senator McMahon, what's your motion?
Rise and report.
You heard the motion. Rise and report. All those in favor say aye.